I've been seeing a lot of Breaking Bad stuff recently come up, and it really got me thinking of a thought that I had when I first started watching the show, and as I grew older, I realized something different. Jesse Pinkman's not a victim at all. He's someone who made adult decisions and had adult consequences. His greed when making so much money in a business where he was going to make so much money in, he was like not happy with it no matter how much it was. He also had this pattern of choosing bad mentors that he really thought of as father figures, whether we're talking about Walt, whether we're talking about Mike, and whether we're even talking about Jane. Yeah, that's right. Jane, I believe, is a mentor to him in some way, shape, or form. She was like a motherly figure, teaching him how to do the right thing, and slowly, as he toxicked her into doing heroin, he also led to her demise as well. I also think Vince Gilligan was potentially hiding this narrative, mostly to make Jesse look like the good guy in certain scenarios and make Walt look like the more bad guy, kind of like someone who's like, hey, a grown man like Walt is doing a lot of these bad things, and Jesse is just this innocent little kid who's like 26. Here's the common fan take for Breaking Bad fans, is that Jesse Pinkman is the Breaking Bad tragic victim who had all these things that happened to him, except he's literally not, and here's why that matters. Jesse's worst decisions played out as victim moments by Vince Gilligan in a way that felt so real that it got me when watching the show back when I was a teenager. I totally thought that Jesse was wronged in life by so many different accounts, and I truly thought Walt was the biggest villain. But Jesse was his own biggest villain because he had no time to actually grow up by himself, because every time he was trying to grow up, he just attached himself to a new father figure that ended up being terrible for him. Jesse isn't some kid who got manipulated though. He's literally a grown man who chose mentors instead of making his own choices, and his greed and stupidity of being, I don't know, a meth head personally led to circumstantial accidents that happened throughout the entire series. And no one wants to talk about that because it's kind of a weird thing to say, like, Jesse Pinkman is not a victim, he's just a piece of shit. No one wants to say that in a show that they dearly loved, because it's one of my favorite series. But as I get older and I watch more clips and I see a lot more edits and people talking about it, I think a lot of people, once they grow up, they realize how much of a problem Jesse was in the series. Let's start with Jesse's greed problem. Do you remember the scene where they're in the lab and they're cooking, and Jesse is getting kind of upset by how much money they're going to be making to Gus, how much Gus is going to be making, the 96 million to the 3 million split him and Walt are getting, and Walt's response is literally, "You're a millionaire and you're complaining?" Jesse's response just reveals everything about it. The way he is breaking down the things that Gus is doing and breaking down how much money he's making without talking about the necessary things that are happening that are going under his nose and going right over his head, frankly, because he's that stupid. There is a $8 million lab beneath them, beneath a laundromat that Gus paid out front with and is giving them to cook in the state-of-the-art lab instead of the RV they were working in. There are security, distribution, logistical, and legal protection that Gus has, amongst other people like Mike helping him. There's just so many things, like even the infrastructure that just let him cook. It was all planned for him, and he's like, do you understand that, you know, Gus is making so much more money than me? Dude, you're making 1.5 million in 90 days and you're complaining? Like, Walt totally understands this perspective, because even though he is older, he is a lot more mature than Jesse, but that doesn't come from age. That just comes from how the person acts. Jesse's literally working for 90 days and making $1.5 million, and only thing he can talk about is how someone else is making more money than him and how he should be making that. I know later in the series, we kind of see him become a more generous person as it goes through, but not nearly as much until the very end of the film. And by film, I mean El Camino, because everything else in the show, he's just a greedy asshole. But for just shits and giggles, let's break down the math on what Jesse was making. 1.5 million in 90 days. It's about $16,000 a day. Yeah, you heard it right. $16,000 to work in a chemistry-safe, controlled environment to cook meth that he was already doing in worse situations. But the greed throughout this series isn't circumstantial. It's developmental throughout the entire thing. Jesse is always trying to find the easiest solution, easiest way out, and overall just the easiest thing that he can get his hands on. If it's selling meth, he only sells a little bit at a time. He doesn't know how to build a distribution company, so he goes to Tuco with no security and gets the shit kicked out of him. Beat the piss out of your little mule boy, and you bring me more meth? I think Walter definitely saw this immediately, but the audience didn't, because, well, we're not real. Walt is like a fictional character. And when we're young and we see Jesse, or young of any age, you know, whether you started watching the show at 18, you started watching the show at 26, by the time you're 30 or by the time you're 46, you definitely see the change. It's not really an age thing of like, oh, the younger generation sees Jesse as a victim. It's just that first watch, whatever age you are of Breaking Bad, later on, you see that Jesse really was terrible. I mean, let's just make a personal connection here. When have you seen people who are in great situations in life, whether that be a good job, good family, having a family, and still complaining about so many things? Greed affects us all. And no matter what age we are, greed does affect us in some way, whether it be greed from money, greed from life we desire. And Jesse is only really doing that. But at what age does it become a desire to have and a desire you need to drop as you get older? Jesse also has a pattern, and every time he has a new person around him, he essentially surrenders them and makes them his mentor figure, and let alone his father figure. Here's pretty much the mentor/father cycle that Jesse follows. Phase 1 is Walt with the dark father figure aspect. Jesse clings to Walt even though he does have two very functional parents who definitely tried to do their best, but Jesse's just a terrible kid. It's also an important detail that Jesse's parents weren't abusive, they were just disappointed in him. Jesse didn't have a hard childhood, he was the person that made his childhood hard. Jesse kind of needed someone who had gone dark like him, someone to basically validate his choices, and Walt, being on the cusp of, dying and wanting to do this whole meth thing, was kind of the perfect person to be like, you know what, this guy's the guy for me, and that is kind of why this all started. I will say that Walt does manipulate Jesse, but only because Jesse lets Walt manipulate him. I mean, how many times have we seen Jesse do things for Walt that he does not want to do, but does anyway, and when he expects some sort of reward or expects something different from Walt, Walt doesn't do anything, and Jesse goes right back to doing it. He never takes a stand. He only takes a stand until someone else approaches him in his life and tells him he needs to make a change. Enter the escapee mentor, Jane. Jesse thinks dating Jane means that there's this independence from Walt, there's this new life, and Jane is someone who can be a fresh start for him. But in actuality, Jane is just as controlling as Walt, just in a completely different direction and getting completely different gain from it. Money, a new life, and obviously a boyfriend who also has a past tendency of drug use. But instead of this independence, they both get hooked on heroin and Jane dies. But I mean, Jane could have lived if Walt did anything. So I'm gonna give points to Jesse for that. But Jane wasn't a partner for Jesse. She was just another person telling him what to do, but this time she had a vagina and Jesse was down for that. And her plan was pretty much simple, kind of like Walt, just take advantage of Jesse, but then get maybe some value of having him around, but taking the money, running away, and just keep using heroin. And Jesse's role was simple: follow along, don't think too hard, and just let himself be manipulated. And this is one of the first times that Jesse meets Mike, and this isn't one of the times where Jesse actually becomes a partner of Mike's, but it's the first time they meet, and it shows the outer shell that Mike has that Jesse desperately desires so much to have, because he's getting manipulated by Walt, he gets manipulated by Jane without even knowing, and now there's this guy, Mike, who seems to have this super hard shell and outlook on life that can maybe give Jesse a fresh perspective. But what does Mike end up doing? Just manipulating Jesse, but maybe in a different way. Mike turns Jesse into this security guy, this kind of macho man, and Jesse thinks he's kind of got this growth and respect, but it's really just Mike giving him this false sense of confidence that Jesse thinks he really has. But once you take Mike away out of the equation, Jesse is still the scared little boy we've known since season 1. So would you say that's manipulation or helping him? Well, if you strip away Mike as a person and Jesse goes back to those old ways, how is it any good? That means Mike has to be there 24/7. He has to be a mentor. He has to be a parent. There's this sense of validation that Jesse craves from Mike though, and it's just another form of manipulation. Because Jesse sees how successful and hard-shelled and easygoing Mike is, seeing as all the things that Mike goes through, he goes through with a, straight face and lives on, and Jesse can barely handle himself when anything bad happens. So he craves this kind of validation from Mike, is like, I want to be that hard-shelled person. But are we seeing the pattern recognition here? Jesse has agency throughout all of this. He's not some 16-year-old kid. He is in his mid-20s cooking industrial quantities of methamphetamine, and he's letting himself get manipulated like he's a 16-year-old boy going through multiple divorces and multiple stepdads and stepmoms. But Jesse's problems aren't just from his manipulators, they're from his core belief system of always wanting to build people up, which is a great thing, but if you don't have proper judgment, the only thing you're building up is a worse case for yourself. One of the first judgment problems we see is his bad decisions aren't bad luck, they're just bad choices. Like when he hires his meth head friends to distribute, meth, Skinny Pete, Badger, and Combo to sell teens on teens on teens, and then ends up getting Combo dead. Super smart move for Jesse to allocate where they're gonna go, and put Combo in a rival spot. Also, Badger gets caught by the police because he's actually stupid and has no sense of like what could go wrong with selling meth out in broad daylight, but that's just me, and also in a public park, dude. Legally, if you ask if I'm a cop and I say no, I have to tell the truth. Nice partners, Jesse. Also, Jesse bringing his non-intimidating friends to meet a literal violent sociopath, the Tuco, who gets brutally beaten up and has Walt do his dirty work for him to get it back, also strengthens their bond of manipulation of I have to do everything for you, but also is just Jesse being stupid. Jesse also will always blame circumstantial things instead of his own planning, choices, or actions throughout his planning. He should have known that Tuco was a psychopath because he had seen the environment and had hearings of who Tuco was. So to be like, he'll probably be nice to me is your own fault. Jesse also just has business illiteracy when it comes to the meth business. Now listen, do I know anything about the meth business? Hell no. But I do know a little bit about business. And I understand that Vince Gilligan kind of wanted Jesse to be this dumb sidekick who didn't know anything, but they did a really good job because he treats this distribution like a social club, getting people to try things, choosing dumb loyalty for friends, competent business decisions, and then just acts victimized when dumb friends do dumb things and he has everyone try the product and it all goes away. Any grown adult running a business knows you don't hire your drinking buddies to manage your revenue stream. And Jesse knows this too, obviously. He just simply doesn't care because he values being liked over being successful because he's insecure and has a 16-year-old brain and body in someone who is 25. I mean, do you remember being in your 20s? I mean, I'm 23, so this is still kind of fresh. Were you this malleable? Were you this incapable of learning? Probably not. You probably had a desire to learn or a capacity to learn of something being like, you know what, if I'm wrong in a situation, I might not know it right away, but in a little bit I might know. Jesse for years just would not know. It would not catch on until it was life or death. At what point do we just stop infantilizing him? But there is kind of a meta narrative that Vince Gilligan does with his sleight of hand to make Jesse look like the victim, and everyone else believes it because it got me, and that's the reason why I'm making this video. Vince Gilligan is the real reason why Jesse is not seen as a victim, and we gotta give props to that. I feel like Vince Gilligan deliberately positioned Jesse as the victim to hide how complicit he actually is because it would just lead to annoying fans being like, can we just cut Jesse off the show? You kind of had to make him look like the victim because when Walt was the victim for a little bit, he eventually became the person making other people victims. And you kind of need that balance, and who better to fit it than Jesse? It's almost like they traded places. Jesse was this big boss in the meth business and Walt was this puny little guy, and then they kind of swapped as one became bigger and one became smaller. Walt is the obvious monster though. We can't sugarcoat that. He's older, he has cancer, and he's essentially just a family man gone wrong. But he is the obvious monster. And that's pretty much the shocking part that Vince wants you to see, a respectable man doing terrible things. But Jesse is just a misdirection to get that off course in some episodes. And audience sympathy is pretty much gained automatically because, you know, it goes to a younger character. Walt versus Jesse, there's a clear age difference. You're probably gonna feel more bad for Jesse than Walt. Jesse also had multiple opportunities to leave. Jesse simply chose to stay in the game because of greed and ego. I mean, who wouldn't want to make millions of dollars, but also who wouldn't want to be respected as you climb up in the meth business? And by El Camino, it feels like Jesse finally admits that he is the bad guy and he has a lot of work to do and I think truly grows up. But real question, why did it take 5 seasons and a movie for us to realize that? Or for let alone Jesse to? I think when you watch Breaking Bad as a young teenager or someone in your early 20s, most people identify with Jesse. You know, he's this wronged by the world kind of person, chip on his shoulder guy who has something to prove. But I think when you rewatch as an adult, the scales kind of fall off and you kind of look at Jesse from a different perspective because you've just lived a little more life than him. And because he's a fictional character and you're not, who's growing, you can grow at a rate eventually when you see Jesse is the problem. These people weren't going to manipulate him if Jesse wasn't so manipulable to begin with. And that's kind of a life lesson too. Not many people are going to take advantage of you if they know they can't take advantage of you. But subconsciously, humans know if you're going to do something for them and they can make you do it multiple times, you're letting yourself get manipulated. They're not necessarily bad people by any means, but if you're someone who shows up late all the time and someone allows that, so you just keep doing it and the other person doesn't ask, but eventually is like, I'm kind of tired of you being late all the time, you're like, shoot, I just coincidentally manipulated someone without knowing because I was allowing a behavior that someone else didn't like that I also knew was bad, but they were letting happen. The world didn't reflect Jesse in a way that made him a victim. Jesse made choices that reflected who he already was. And who was he? Not great. But I don't know. Am I wrong? Let me know.